Lyme disease can be difficult to diagnose as the incubation period may vary from 3 days to more than a month post-infection. However, the majority of cases will present with a large rash at the site of the tick bite. This rash looks like a bullseye target and is more than 5 centimeters in diameter, migrating out from the site of the bite in concentric circles. This may also be accompanied by flu-like symptoms, although the symptoms are highly variable from person to person. Some may have mild symptoms soon after the bite, which becomes more severe later on. If left untreated, the disease may become chronic in later stages. It is known as disseminated Lyme disease when the bacteria spreads out to the rest of the body. There may be neurological involvement such as facial palsy and meningitis. The heart may also be affected, and cardiac abnormalities may be present, such as resting heart rates of over 100 beats per minute. There may also be chronic arthritis with joint pain, which although common in the elderly, is very unusual in young children. Multiple secondary annular rashes may also appear, such as the ones around the eyes of the boy in the picture. He was walking in a forested area 3 weeks before and was bitten by 2 ticks on the back of one of his knees. In North America, rodents and deer are the most common wildlife reservoir hosts of Lyme disease, which is transmitted to humans by infected black-legged ticks. Ticks need to be attached for more than 24 hours before enough bacteria can be transmitted to cause an infection. This graph shows the rates of Lyme disease in Canada in the red line, across Ontario in the purple line, and Toronto in the blue line. You can see that over the past decade, the rate has increased quite dramatically, especially in Ontario, which has a higher rate than the national average. The Toronto rates are lower because it is an urban area and the exposure to ticks is lower. Lyme disease recently became a national notifiable disease in 2009. Because of the increasing incidence rates in many parts of Canada and Ontario, it has become a major public health concern. Over the past decade, the incidence rates have ranged from 0.3 to 5.9 cases per 100,000 population in Canada, and 0.7 to 7.2 per 100,000 in Ontario. The incidence of Lyme disease is seasonal, peaking during the summer months. This coincides with both increased human outdoor activities and presence of infectious nymphs. Since they're so small, nymphs are much harder to detect than adult ticks, and they're more likely to attach for longer periods of time, thus increasing the risk of disease transmission. This is a graphical representation of data that was downloaded from the Public Health Ontario website, showing the seasonal summer peaks of Lyme disease over the past decade. You can see how the numbers are at baseline levels in January and then rise to the highest level in July every year. Suitable woodland habitats for black-legged ticks are emerging. In 2015, Rouge Park, on the eastern fringe of the GTA, between Toronto and Pickering, was identified as a new risk area. Eastern and southwestern Ontario are particular hotspots for Lyme disease-carrying ticks. The majority of cases have been acquired locally in Ontario. This figure displays a background map showing risk areas. Risk areas, which are hatched, are locations where the risk from tick bites and Lyme disease is known to occur, or the risk of tick bites and Lyme disease is possible. The risk areas are indicated in insets on the maps in various areas of Canada. This is a more detailed map of the Ontario risk areas in yellow, many of which are provincial parks. The 5 main ones are Point Pelly National Park, Rondeau Provincial Park, Turkey Point Provincial Park, Long Point Peninsula, including Long Point Provincial Park in the National Wildlife Area, and the Wainfleet Bog near Welland on the Niagara Peninsula. Other risk areas are locations around Kingston in the St. Lawrence Valley that extend northeast towards Ottawa. This is the same map a year later in 2019. You can see that the risk areas have expanded considerably, and now cover the Golden Horseshoe area as well as the northern shores of Lake Simcoe, stretching from Barrie to Orillia and extending further west of Ottawa into the eastern part of Renfrew County. In 2020, the areas remain the same as in 2019, with the exception of a new area south of the Bruce Peninsula and another one in the area west of London. In 2021, another new area appeared, located north of Peterborough. From these maps, you can clearly see that risk areas have increased from year to year, and there is now a potential risk of contracting Lyme disease in many parts of Ontario. Both active and passive tick surveillance exists in Canada. Passive surveillance is where there is voluntary submission of ticks found on humans and domestic animals by veterinarians and healthcare professionals. Active field surveillance, on the other hand, involves the collection of ticks and/or wild animal hosts to determine whether populations of vector ticks and endemic cycles of Borrelia burgdorferi transmission have become established. In 2014, several public health units in eastern Ontario discontinued passive surveillance and switched to programs of active tick surveillance. As you saw from the map of Ontario Lyme disease risk areas, higher incidence rates and exposure locations were reported in eastern regions of Ontario. These are also the same Ontario regions that submitted the largest number of black-livered ticks. More than 50% of tick submissions are from Eastern Ontario public health units. This map shows the percentage of Borrelia burgdorferi positive ticks in various locations across Ontario in 2018. You can see that most of the locations are in southern Ontario. In many locations, more than 50% of the ticks submitted were positive. From 2018 to 2020, the Lyme disease incidence rate in Ontario increased from 4.3 to 8.1 cases per 100,000 population. The two health units with the highest incidence rates were both in southeastern Ontario, with more than 10 times the provincial rate and nearly 20 times the national rate. To request a diagnostic laboratory test for Lyme disease, a blood specimen has to be submitted. The lab will then carry out two-tiered serological tests, which includes enzyme immunoassay screening, followed by confirmation with immunoblotting. Since Borrelia burgdorferi is a spirochete, it is difficult to detect using bright field microscopy, and dark field microscopy needs to be used. It is also a slow-growing bacteria, and cultures from skin lesions take 12 weeks to grow, so it is rarely performed as a diagnostic test. Antibiotics can be used to treat Lyme disease, and women, children, and those with penicillin allergies should be given alternative antibiotics to those in the tetracycline and penicillin groups. The treatment is longer for those with chronic Lyme disease, a month, and intravenous antibiotics need to be administered for those with neurological abnormalities. The vaccine for Lyme disease is no longer available due to low demand and some adverse effects such as joint reaction. It is therefore important to prevent getting bitten by ticks. Be extra vigilant in warmer months from April to September. Avoid wooded and bushy areas with high grass and walk in the center of trails. Wear closed-toed shoes, long-sleeve shirts and pants with their socks pulled over the hems so that bare skin isn't exposed. Wear light-colored clothing so ticks can be detected easily. Use insect repellents containing DEET, and shower or bathe within 2 hours of being outdoors. Examine the body area for ticks and remove them promptly. If you remove ticks within 24 to 36 hours, that usually prevents infection. If a tick is found, carefully remove the attached tick with tweezers by grasping the tick's head as close to the skin as possible. Pull slowly. Ensure that the mouth parts do not break off and remain in the skin, and avoid twisting or crushing the tick. The bite site should be washed with soap and water or disinfected with alcohol-based hand sanitizers. Tumble close in dryer on high heat for an hour to kill any remaining ticks. Contact a doctor immediately if symptoms of Lyme disease or other tick-borne diseases develop. Tularemia is a bacterial disease, also known as rabbit fever or lawnmower disease. The symptoms are flu-like with fever, chills, and malaise, and this usually shows up 2 to 5 days post-infection. There are 4 different types of tularemia. The ulceroglandular form shows clinically as a necrotic lesion that ulcerates at the site of the tick bite or the deerfly bite. The second type is oculoglandular, which causes conjunctivitis that is purulent. So there's the eyes get infected, so they start oozing pus and get really weepy. The third type is typhoidal, which is similar to typhoid fever. And the final type is pneumonic, similar to plague, as it affects the pulmonary part of the body. Tularemia is a disease of wild mammals. These are mainly squirrels, muskrats, beaver, deer, and rabbits. They're transmitted directly by contact with infected animals or from a bite of a vector, such as ticks or deer flies. It can also be transmitted through ingestion of contaminated food or water, and also inhalation of aerosols that carry the bacteria. It is present in North America, and reports of tularemia have come in sporadically in Canada and also the United States. There is a link that I've put at the bottom of this slide, and that is about an outbreak of pneumonic tularemia that occurred in Martha's Vineyard in northeastern United States. And you can click on the link if you would like to read the paper. Very, very interesting because the outbreak involved several individuals that had been mowing their lawn, and the exposure was through dust and also aerosols that were generated from these individuals mowing over dead animals, dead rodents, and they had no idea actually that they were exposed till they started getting this disease. Tularemia is a nationally notifiable disease, and as I mentioned before on the last slide, there have been sporadic cases reported over the past decade. There really haven't been that many cases, and the incidence rate is very low, less than 0.1 case per 100,000 population. In terms of case numbers, there have only been 4 to 13 cases reported annually in Canada, and in Ontario, only 6 cases have been reported over an entire 10-year period. In 2015, a confirmed case was reported to Sudbury Health Unit. There's only been one tularemia advisory in the past. This involved a Manitoba pet distributor whose dwarf and regular hamsters tested positive for tularemia. In the same shipment with the hamsters were also other small rodents. This affected several provinces, BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, as well as northwestern Ontario. The advisory stated that healthcare providers should be consulted if any illness was encountered within 14 days of contact with sick or dead hamsters. The bacteria that causes tularemia is called Francisella tularensis. It's a gram-negative bacteria, and it's a small facultative cocobacilli. It's very difficult to grow, it's fastidious, and it requires soft hydrocompounds to grow well. So most of the time, the diagnosis of tularemia is carried out using serology. Tularemia can be treated with antibiotics. It is best to remove ticks promptly to prevent further transmission of the pathogen. Some of the antibiotics, the more common ones that are given are very effective, but there have been reports of relapses occurring with a few of these antibiotics. There are some preventative measures that can be taken by high-risk groups such as wildlife rescue workers and hunters. They should handle wild mammals with gloves and eye protection. Laboratory workers as well, if they're culturing the bacteria, should be handling the cultures in a biosafety cabinet and be using level 2 containment. Landscapers who are using lawnmowers or weed whackers should check the area for dead wildlife before they start mowing, and they should also wear a protective mask. Insect repellents should also be used. There is a live attenuated vaccine, but only for lab workers and those who have to be in contact with infected animals. It's not for the general public.